whoa! The script says Bondsploitation, not an actual Bond review, you idiot! Many moons ago, I reviewed a film I absolutely adore, called Dead End Driving, a very low-budget Ozploitation from the mid-80s, directed by Brian Trenchard Smith. And in that retrospective, I mentioned his first feature-length film, The Man from Hong Kong, which, being a 1975 co-production between Australia and Hong Kong, is important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it was one of the first such co-productions, and melds both Eastern and Western action as a result, being full of over-the-top action sequences, some very cheesy dialogue, and conceptually is a satire of Dirty Harry and James Bond movies. I can only assume that satire in this case is some form of Ozzie slang, a total rip-off, because the Bond influences are very, very strong with this one. The Dirty Harry ones, not nearly as much in my opinion. And that's not a bad thing though, because as someone who grew up watching the 70s Bonds, their influence is definitely a major strength of this film for me, and where we will start this review. The first Bond inspiration you are likely to notice is the poster, which is very reminiscent of the Bond films from this era, basically showing stylized panoramic scenes from the actual film. The next clear influence being the fact the villain's lair is a penthouse suite, much like in the Bond film Diamonds Are Forever, which had been released a few years prior. We even get a former 007 James Bond actor himself, this time as the main antagonist. George Lazenby, the Australian who played Bond in one film before quitting, assuming he was now a major Hollywood star, plays the antagonist Jack Wilton, a Sydney crime boss. Sadly, unlike a lot of Bond villains from the 60s and 70s, he isn't very cartoonishly evil, and doesn't even have much of an evil plot going on, or story of any kind really, but we will get to that later on when we discuss the weaknesses of this film. The next influence this takes from Bond is the protagonist Inspector Fang Sing Leng has multiple lovers throughout, much like Bond has numerous Bond girls to do the horizontal tango with. Actually, this is probably one of the very few films, if not the only film I've ever seen, where an Asian man has sexy times with multiple white women, something that even 50 years later is rarer than tits on a bull. So kudos for that. If you know of any other films where this happens, let me know down in the comments. There's even a Bond-esque title song performed by the band Jigsaw called Sky High, which did actually go on to become a bit of a hit. I must admit, it is a bit of a banger. The film also opens with an action set piece at a famous landmark, this being another hallmark of Bond films from the 70s. The Man from Hong Kong, of course, opens at Australia's most famous natural landmark, Uluru, or Ayers Rock as the film calls it, where we get a bit of a chase of the rock, a fair bit of fisticuffs, and even a little bit of a car chase, before Inspector Bob Taylor, played by Roger Ward, a prolific actor who will be fairly recognisable to anyone who has seen more than a few Aussie films from the 70s and 80s, arrests a Chinese man who was smuggling heroin. Weirdly enough, you can't actually climb Uluru anymore, seeing as it's a sacred site. You definitely can't pick pieces of it up and hurl them at someone. The opening scene does highlight two of the strengths of this film though. Firstly, there are a whole bunch of fairly exciting martial arts sequences throughout, and just action sequences in general. Originally meant as a Bruce Lee vehicle, the film had to be retooled as a Jimmy Wang Yu one due to Lee's untimely death. As for Wang Yu, he's definitely a major positive here, having a fair amount of on-screen charisma and some genuine martial arts chops. In fact, for a time in the 70s, he was the biggest kung fu star in the world, although according to Brian Trenchard Smith, he was incredibly difficult to work with, and possibly a real-life triad, having, let's say, strong but unconfirmed connections to a Taiwanese criminal organisation, the Bamboo Union. He even faced a real-life trial for attempted murder of a rival gang member, where during a recess during his trial for attempted murder, someone else got stabbed due to an altercation with a rival triad group. He was somehow not convicted of either crime. He's an interesting character off screen to say the least, and brings some of that character onto the screen here. Beyond the very many martial arts sequences, there are a few decent car chases, especially one in the third act that is really pretty top notch, with a whole lot of cars bashing into each other, for real, being forced off a road, doing several rolls and then exploding. Hell, it packs pretty much every car chase trope imaginable in. Along with the martial arts and action come some pretty inventive stunts, mainly involving hang gliding, although the film weirdly insists on calling it kiting. Jimmy Wang Yu going all Prince of Persia and walking up some drain pipes amongst several other pretty dangerous looking high-rise stunts. Actually, both the stars, Lazenby and Jimmy, got injured doing their character's signature set-piece stunt. Lazenby suffered burns in the climactic fight scene, when he couldn't get his burning jacket off, leading to his hands getting pretty seriously burnt. They just kept the take in the final film, and you can quite clearly see him visibly struggling to get his jacket off. Jimmy Wang Yu also apparently injured himself doing the hang gliding stunt, although I haven't been able to ascertain exactly how. All in all, the action sequences are pretty entertaining and worth a watch. If you enjoy 70s era Bond and martial arts, then you'll love what's on show here. The other thing the opening scene highlights that's a real strength of this movie is the light-hearted humour this film employs throughout, which, let's be honest, is another staple of Bond films from the 70s. With the Chinese man arrested for drug smuggling, using one of the greatest comeback put-downs I've ever heard. Put your head up your ass and close it afterwards. Genuinely might start using that one, but properly. There are several other examples of such humour throughout, and I genuinely laughed out loud on several occasions. The 106-minute runtime skips along pretty well as a result of all this, but it's not all sunshine and roses, because there are some problems with this flick. Namely the plot, or its almost total lack of one. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't expect some deep ruminative narrative in my action films or anything. The narrative in the action genre largely exists to just serve up exciting action scenes. I do expect some form of basic plot where everyone has a motivation for what they are doing, usually revolving around some form of evil plot and or a MacGuffin. Which is kind of what happens here, except we get the Wish.com version of it. It's beyond bare bones, in other words, containing neither an evil plot or a MacGuffin. Inspector Fang Xing Leng is brought to Australia to extradite the Chinese guy caught drug smuggling in the opening scene back to Hong Kong, but he gets sucked into the orbit of Jack Wilton, Sydney's most notorious criminal, when one of his goons assassinates the drug smuggler. The inspector then goes on a bit of a mass murder spree, starting off with the assassin. I kid you not, he legit kills at least 20 goons in his quest to stop Wilton, and then straps a grenade to Wilton's teeth, throws him in a safe, and makes him go boom. Dude's a mass murderer. It makes very little sense, as yeah, he's a cop, but he's a Hong Kong cop miles away from his own jurisdiction, and cops usually don't blow people up or murder them. Unless they're from America, then it's probably a given. Wilton, for his part, never really seems to have much of an evil plan. He kills the original drug smuggler, I assume to stop him narking, then just continues to try and kill the inspector. Even though, had he just done nothing, the inspector would have taken the drug smuggler straight back to Hong Kong, getting rid of both of Wilton's problems. As a result of Wilton not having much, if any, other plan, we rarely see Lazenby, which seems a waste, as he's got legit on-screen presence, and isn't half bad at throwing fists. I wish he had been a bit more of a straight-up, cartoonish Bond villain, and had an actual evil plot that the inspector had to foil, so we both got a bit more depth to the narrative and more Lazenby. As it is, it very much feels like a series of loosely linked action scenes strung together rather than a cohesive plot. Added to this, the supporting cast, who do get quite a lot of screen time, is nowhere near as strong as the main cast, with Yuki's burn and the love interests being particularly weak in my opinion. I can't quite put my finger on why, but there's something a little bit off about their performances, and if you have seen this or do watch, you'll see exactly what I mean. Even Roger Ward seems a little bit ropey acting-wise at times throughout this film. Due to the above problems, there are definite issues with the pacing of the film, with Acts 1 and 2 opening strongly, then having a bit of a lull as we wait for the next action set piece to happen due to the film's very basic, almost non-existent plotting, not having enough going on to keep you engaged between them. The third act is then just one 30-minute long balls-to-the-wall action sequence. Overall, The Man from Hong Kong is a fine example of Australian new wave cinema and Ozploitation films in general, and it's no surprise it has gone on to become somewhat of a cult film. Nor is it much of a surprise it didn't go on to become the blockbuster hit that Trenchard Smith and his collaborators hoped for, although it got a good reaction at the Cannes Film Festival, and sold well enough it made back its budget before it even saw the inside of a theatre. Basically, it's the Ozzie film that walked, so films like Mad Max could run, with the car chase stunt coordinator from this going on to work on that film's car chases too. I of course think this is well worth your time, even though it does lack any real depth to the plot. I think you'll enjoy it, especially if you are a fan of 70s martial arts films and Bond-esque action. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you later. If you enjoyed that, please like, comment and subscribe. Good lord, it is so hot wearing this suit in 40-degree heat. I'm never doing this again. Goodbye.